Good Monday afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Williams. Welcome to the Politically Incorrect podcast. Now, this is day 73 of the war between Israel and Hamas. We'll talk about the headlines. First and foremost, headline out there is that the UN Security Council, which was meeting today, or supposed to meet today, to vote on some sort of resolution bringing Israel and Hamas to the bargaining table or to create some sort of ceasefire has been postponed. It will not take place until tomorrow. Okay, so that's at this point in time, presently, where we are in that situation. Today, United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was in Tel Aviv to talk with the War Council as well as with Prime Minister Netanyahu. We'll talk about how that went and where we're going after that. That's our cover story. But first, we always bring you the daily briefing. So, again, from this standpoint, Tal Heinrich, who is the spokesperson for the Prime Minister's office, will give you the daily briefing, no edits on it, and then there'll be questions afterwards, and then after that, we'll come back and we'll talk about, as I said before, the headlines of the day, and specifically our number one story, what Lloyd Austin, General Austin, I should say, Secretary of Defense, was doing in Israel, and also some very interesting behind-the-scenes things that are going on with the State Department as well as the Department of Defense, and an update on potential deal in the Senate for aid to Israel and to the Ukraine. Okay, all right. So all that's coming up. But first, let's bring Tal on, and she'll give you the daily update from Israel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tal Heinrich, a spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office. This is day 73 of the October 7th war. Lots of updates today, and I will then take your questions. Let's start with the latest figures. To date, over 1,200 victims of the 10/7 massacre have been identified, and 10,718 have been injured since the beginning of this war. Hamas has fired over 12,500 rockets at Israeli communities, with over 2,000 misfiring, the large majority of which fall inside Gaza and cause extensive damage and casualties. The IDF has notified the families of the deaths of 459 soldiers. Our thoughts are with these families and the entire nation of Israel at this impossible time of grief. Hamas is still holding 129 people hostage since 10/7. Among the remaining 129 hostages in the Hamas terror dungeons are 110 males and 19 females. There are 2 children under the age of 18, the Bibas children, and 10 over 75. 118 of the hostages are Israelis, another 11 are foreign nationals. Meanwhile, hostages who returned to Israel continue to share their horrendous accounts of their captivity in Gaza. Last night, CBS's 60 Minutes aired an interview with one of the hostages who was released, 36-year-old Yarden Roman Gat. Yarden described being stripped of her clothing and being paraded around as a trophy while crowds celebrated. Yarden says she was, quote, not a person, end quote. Yesterday, the IDF revealed yet again how twisted and dangerous Hamas's army of terror is, with the exposure of one of the largest terrorist tunnels in Gaza. It spans well over 4 kilometers, that's 2.5 miles. Its entrance is located only 400 meters, less than 1,400 feet from the Erez crossing, used by Gazans on a daily basis to enter Israel for work and medical treatment in Israeli hospitals. Now, this tunnel, built 50 meters underground, is wide enough for a truck to drive through it. And in fact, it was a project led by Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, the butcher of Khan Yunis. I urge you to take a look at this video that was posted by the IDF showing that tunnel. The IDF continues to discover and target Hamas assets among civilian areas in Khan Yunis, Jabalia, and Shajaiya. In a home belonging to a senior Hamas commander in Jabalia, our soldiers seized over 5 million shekels worth of cash. That's the equivalent of close to $100.5 million US dollars. This is the same Jabalia where the Nahal Brigade located an operational tunnel shaft leading directly into a child's bedroom. Regarding the upcoming UN Security Council vote, the UN Security Council that will convene today to discuss a resolution calling for a ceasefire, the same UN Security Council that to this day has not condemned Hamas. A ceasefire that leaves Hamas in power with impunity and with the desire and capability to repeat October 7th again and again and again is simply unacceptable. We are thankful to our friends around the world who get it. Now, the proposed UN Security Council resolution on the table also calls for humanitarian aid access to Gaza. In case you haven't noticed, humanitarian aid is entering Gaza. Yesterday, 201 humanitarian aid trucks were inspected and transferred to the Gaza Strip. 122 trucks were inspected at Nitzana crossing and transferred to Gaza via the Rafah crossing. That's the border with Egypt. 79 were inspected and transferred to Gaza via Kerem Shalom, as per our agreement with the United States. Kerem Shalom, a border crossing between Israel and Gaza that was damaged on October 7th, is now operational. Let me underscore a few important points here. Israel has access capacity to inspect more trucks than the ones entering the Gaza Strip. It's international aid organizations and UN agencies who should keep up with the pace. Israel has placed no restrictions on the entry of food and water into Gaza. Plus, on multiple occasions, we have seen and published proof of Hamas stealing these essential resources from its own population. The deafening silence of aid groups and international organizations about this is not only ridiculous, but it's also counterproductive. We are being asked about a claim that Israel allegedly targeted a Catholic church, the Holy Family Parish in the Gaza Strip. According to an IDF investigation, this claim is not true. If you look at the map, the church is located in the Rimal neighborhood of Gaza City, where on Saturday, in that specific area, there was no fighting. The IDF takes claims regarding harm to sensitive sites with the utmost seriousness, especially churches, considering that Christian communities are a minority group in the Middle East. Representatives of the church contacted the IDF regarding explosions that were heard near the church. And during the dialogue between the IDF and representatives of the Christian community in Gaza City, no reports of a hit on a church nor civilians being injured or killed were raised. The IDF only targets terrorist and terror infrastructure and does not target civilians, no matter their religion. And our forces take vast, unprecedented measures to avoid harm to uninvolved civilians while fighting against a terrorist organization, which does everything to purposely put civilians at risk. On Saturday, there was indeed fighting in the vicinity of a different church, the Latin church in the Shajaiya area. Shajaiya is one of the most aggressive battle zones in this war. Our forces responded to fire by Hamas terrorists. Note that the civilian population in that area was requested to evacuate many weeks ago. It is important to remember here that throughout the war, and specifically this week, the IDF has proven once again that it is loyal to truth and transparency, even when it is the most inconvenient, awful thing to us to acknowledge, as you saw in the incident of the 3 Israeli hostages who managed to escape their captors and were shot at mistakenly by our forces. This is a war. All wars are tragic, even the most justified ones. Israel didn't want this war. Israel didn't start this war. but we will finish this war when Hamas is eliminated. I will now take your questions.
The first question is from Gwen Ackerman from Bloomberg. Is there a comment, please, on Iran's claim that Israel and the US are behind the cyber attack on its gas stations?
No, we have nothing to say about Iran's claims. What we do have to say today, though, is that Iran has been involved in a cyber attack against an Israeli hospital in Israel's north in the city of Tzafat. That's the Ziv hospital.
Melanie Lidman from AP. Can you talk a little bit about why the aerial bombardment of Gaza has been so intense? 22,000 targets, according to the last IDF release. Can you explain a bit about why such intense levels of aerial bombardment is needed?
Well, we have defined two goals for this war. A war, again, as I stated, we didn't start and we didn't want. And as you know, we said that Hamas terrorist regime must be eliminated, their military wing, their governance body in Gaza. After this war, once we are done, Hamas will be no longer in control of this territory. And we also said that we want to bring back all hostages home. And of course, after that, to secure that they will not see a resurgence of terrorism from that territory. Now, it is a question, I guess, that you're asking about proportionality. And proportionality, according to international law and according to common sense, is doing what it takes to achieve a legitimate military goal. Our goal is legitimate. It is very legitimate. It is the just cause. So we are doing whatever it takes in the best operational way that the IDF has decided upon to eliminate the Hamas terrorist regime. And of course, while we're doing it, we are also doing our utmost efforts to keep the civilian population in the Gaza Strip out of harm's way. We want to minimize the civilian suffering and civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip, while Hamas, they purposely want to put civilians in danger. They want to increase the civilian suffering. They want to increase the civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip. In fact, in interviews of Hamas leaders, they say that they want to sacrifice the Palestinian population of Gaza to achieve their sick goal of obliterating the only Jewish state in the world. So we will not let them achieve any of these goals. Nathan?
Lior Soroka, Washington Post. Human Rights Watch claimed today that the Israeli government is using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare in the Gaza Strip. Can you relate to that?
Well, this is a very unfortunate language. This is absolutely not true, because if you listen carefully to the daily briefing that I just gave you, then you'd see that many trucks, in fact, yesterday 201 trucks with humanitarian aid entered the Gaza Strip, and we said that we have even greater ability to inspect more and more trucks than the UN agencies and humanitarian aid organizations can actually deliver. So we placed zero restrictions on the amount of food and water that are being able to enter the Gaza Strip. So this is a ridiculous claim. And in fact, Hamas terrorists are the ones stealing these important resources from the Palestinian population in Gaza.
From Sky News, does Israel deny the claims its sniper shot 2 civilians in the Catholic Church in Gaza?
I just answered that question during the briefing. I told you that there was no fighting in the Rimal neighborhood on Saturday where this specific Catholic church is located. The IDF has conducted an investigation, and so there was no fighting around that area. The IDF representatives also talked to representatives of the Christian community over there, and as I stated, it was not something that was brought up in the conversation. So we are indeed investigating. We looked into it. And again, I said it that even when the truth is the most inconvenient thing to us to acknowledge, we say it. we admit it, we acknowledge it, as was the case with the 3 Israeli hostages who were mistakenly shot at by our forces. This is not just such a case. We've had numerous incidents throughout this war, where day 73 now, in which Israel was accused of things. It was reported, and then eventually, as you know, media channels, media reports had to backtrack their statements. So after more and more was transpired. So, Nathan?
Is from JNS and David Isaac. U.S. Defense Secretary Austin is reportedly going to ask Israel to end its large-scale ground campaign in favor of more targeted strikes. Jake Sullivan told press on Friday that Israel is entering a new phase of the war with more precise targeting. Yet we haven't heard a statement to this effect from Israeli officials. Can you clarify what Israel's plan is? Is Israel moving to a new, more targeted phase? And is it doing so at the behest of the United States?
Well, first, I haven't seen such a report about Lloyd Austin's visit. We will have to wait and see what comes out in the discussions and statements. You see, there's no daylight between us and our best friends in Washington in what pertains to the goals of this war, which is to eliminate the Hamas terrorist regime, to bring back all hostages home, and of course, to avoid as much civilian suffering and civilian casualties to the extent possible. And the IDF is doing unprecedented steps in modern urban warfare in that respect. Now, regarding the next phase of the war and such questions, well, this is for the Israeli leadership and the IDF to decide. Israel, of course, is a sovereign nation. We will do whatever it takes to achieve the goals that I just stated. There's no stopwatch here. Israel is fighting what the Prime Minister has referred to as Israel's second war of independence. It's a war on our survival. Hamas is a genocidal existential threat on our borders. And our nation decided that we will no longer live next to this terrorist enclave. Full stop. Okay. No more questions?
Williams from Zenger International. Tal, is the aid entering Gaza still taking too long because the UN organizations are too slow in giving out the aid?
Well, yes, Jim. As I said, we have ability to inspect these trucks, and 2001 trucks entered yesterday. We can check more. We have the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is a crossing between Israel and Gaza, operational now again as per the agreements with our friends in Washington. So aid is not only entering from the Rafah border crossing, but also from the Kerem Shalom one for now. And international aid organizations should keep up with the pace of our inspections. Indeed.
Time for today from Joel Pollack at Breitbart News. Can you describe the national mood in the wake of the devastating event with the 3 hostages? How do people in Israel feel?
Oh, that is a very, very tragic event. There's a heavily charged atmosphere here, I can tell you, definitely. We're all embracing, hugging these 3 families. That should not have happened. We're drawing the very important lessons as we go, because such an incident can never, ever reoccur again. And our forces should have brought up this idea that some of the hostages may be able to somehow flee their captors. It should have been a scenario that we should have been better prepared to. And if you heard the IDF chief of staff yesterday, he went down south, he talked to soldiers, and he stated again that this should have never happened, because the 3 hostages, so it seemed, they really thought it through. They didn't want to appear as a threat to our forces, and they did almost everything possible not to appear as such, and yet they were mistakenly identified as such. But you see Shaja'iyah, it's such a terrible scene right now. It's full with terrorists and terrorist supporters. And at this point, the entire civilian population there should have evacuated many, many weeks ago. So the only ones there on the ground are either terrorist supporters, or IDF forces. But we should have been better prepared to it. Now, there have been ambushes there. There have been traps and whatnot. And there was an incident there right before, with an encounter with terrorists right before that tragic incident and right after. And just a few days ago, we lost 9 of our soldiers there, our best sons. So it's a very, very complicated scenery. And as you know, our enemy is brutal. They wear civilian clothing. They try to lure in our forces, sometimes by playing sound in Hebrew, voices in Hebrew, sometimes even of children, to try to lure them into their ambushes. So it's a very, very difficult moment for our nation. Okay, that concludes the daily briefing for today. Thank you for joining us.
We thank Tal Heinrich for joining us today with the daily briefing. My question that I brought up to Tal, and she had emphasized it, and I think it can't be emphasized enough, is that aid is going through now 2 different areas in Israel, and they're not stopping the food, water, and necessities, medicine that needs to go in. The issue seemingly is, do the UN and their partners who are distributing this aid really have the number of people that it takes to get it to those who need it? Okay, so that's a key point. Is there going to always be enough? No. That's a sad and very terrible part of war in general. Things happen that you cannot plan for, and so that is something that needs to be addressed, and hopefully will. But the idea that Israel is starving people and not trying to get them food and water and the necessities that they need is a falsehood. It's an absolute and total lie. They are attempting to get it to the people. The fact that it's not getting there is a problem with regard to the supply chain that is being bottlenecked at the moment by UN and their UN organizations. So that's why I asked the question, and Tal gave a very strong and very good response. So let's get to our focus for today, and that's General Lloyd Austin is a retired United States Army 4-star general. He serves right now as the Secretary of Defense, and he was the former head of CENTCOM. Now, that's going to be interesting and important later in our discussion. Okay, so General Austin, or I should say Secretary Austin, was in the Middle East today, and he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they talked about what's going on with the war with Hamas. There is calls for, and General Austin discussed ways to get more humanitarian aid to the people on the Gaza Strip, and that's something as we just spoke about with Tal. The ability to even increase the 200 trucks a day to 250 or 300. They're going to try to get some help. The United States is trying to get whatever necessary help they can do to get more aid in there. Then they're going in that direction. That is absolutely where he wants to be. Now, in public comments, Austin was clear that he offered very little criticism of the death toll, saying the United States will continue to support Israel's war on Hamas and send it munitions and other defense aid. Now, he did say in the press conference that it is not the United States' position to tell Israel how to fight a war. Okay? Obviously, behind doors, I'm quite certain that General Austin, who probably knows, as the head of CENTCOM, how best to fight wars in close quarters, which he did in both what went on in Fallujah as well as Afghanistan. So certainly he is an expert in how wars need to be fought as the head of CENTCOM. So he made it clear that much has been reported. The United States is not telling Israel how to fight a war. Okay? They're not. What they are doing is they're explaining and helping, and CENTCOM is in a report that I wrote last week, and we talked about, CENTCOM is in lockstep with Israel, trying to get them whatever information they need, be it satellite information, be it door-to-door type information and planning, if you will. They have over 45 different assets, meaning groups of people from around the world who can share intel with the IDF to make sure that they know what's going on. So, General Austin, the Secretary of Defense, was there to discuss the importance of where the war goes next. And clearly, is it something that will be more targeted? I certainly believe that's where we're headed, and we'll be headed there in 2 weeks or a month, or I don't know, but I believe that that's where we're headed, and it's probably sooner as opposed to later. He was also there because, as you probably know, the United States has 2 aircraft carriers in the Red Sea. And as of this weekend, in checking with CENTCOM, which I did over the weekend, they confirmed that there has been heavy drone action going on over the Red Sea. And that increasing drone action, they feel, is basically being done to attempt to draw the United States into the war. Now, the United States is attempting to stay, they're clearly, as I said, they're advising and helping the Israelis. There's no question about that. No one's hiding it. But what they are trying to do, and this is an important distinction, is they are working with people within the region, and we'll get to that in a minute, to try to see what life's going to be like after the war's over. You have to plan for what's going to happen on what we've been calling the day after. All right, that must be in place. You have to have an end game here. You can't just fight a war without knowing what you're going to do when it's over. Okay, that's something that Austin and Secretary of State Blinken, President Biden, the U.S. has been firmly in the camp of you have to think about the day after now, as opposed to when the war stops. You have to plan ahead. And it's like playing chess. You plan ahead. So I'm certain that Austin brought that part of the game plan up to the cabinet and, of course, to Prime Minister Netanyahu. At a press conference afterwards, Austin said that he told Netanyahu that the U.S. is committed to Israel and it's unshakable, noting that it was his personal 4th visit since the October 7th terrorist attack. America is committed to Israel. It's unwavering, and no individual group and or state should test our resolve. So that coming from Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in a press briefing this afternoon in Tel Aviv. Now, the U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Charles Q. Brown, said that when it comes to the threat of attacks on ships in the Red Sea by Yemen and Houthis, the U.S. is leading a multinational maritime task force to uphold the bedrock principle of freedom of navigation. Iran's support of the Houthi attack on commercial vessels must stop, full stop, or they will suffer the consequences. So, Austin, at his press conference, he had a second one later, that the Houthi attacks are reckless, dangerous, and they're violating international law. He said that they would be hosting a virtual meeting on Monday with the ministers to address this threat in a meaningful way. He said that he also called on Hezbollah in Lebanon to make sure that they do not do things that would provoke a wider conflict. So the talk is definitely being laid out to say what Biden said when he first went over there, and that is the idea of trying to make this a 2 or a 3 front war is not wise, because the United States would be involved with regard to Iran. They will, without question, and this is not something I'm saying, this is something that Secretary of Defense Austin and Secretary of State Blinken have said, and that is they will not tolerate it. And as President Biden said, no means no. There will be retribution, not at the Houthis, not at Hezbollah. It will be taken on Iran. So they would be wise not to continue to provoke the United States in the Red Sea, or to try to extend the war on the battle, with the borders of Lebanon. Now, Austin vowed to continue to provide Israel with the equipment needed to defend their country, citing the munitions, tactical vehicles, air defense systems are all going to Netanyahu, and what the War Council and the IDF needs. Whatever they need, they will be provided. Okay? Now, there has been some conversation about, as we said before, about more humanitarian assistance that must reach Gazan civilians. These are things that we just talked about, and that Austin once again pushed for, and said that the opening of the Krei Shalom crossing into Gaza, which Tal referenced, is hopefully a move, as Austin called it, to funnel more aid into Palestinians in Gaza. Okay, so the second border crossing opening should be able to help get that humanitarian aid in, which we spoke about a little earlier. Okay, now behind closed doors, the U.S. defense chief was expected to press Israeli officials to look toward winding down combat operations in Gaza, withdrawing some of, if not most of, the ground troops, and moving toward the targeted aimed at killing the Hamas leaders and destroying the tunnels. And of course, number one on the list would be rescuing hostages. Austin's role here was not to call out the Israeli leadership and say, look, this is how we want you to fight the war. It's not, as I said before when we started this conversation, that wasn't what he went to Tel Aviv to do. What he did go there to do was explain in great detail the history that we, the United States, has had in fighting these wars, where we have gotten on the wrong side of global opinion when we have perhaps overstepped and overreached the fighting aspect of it. You need to have the world on your side. And the further we get away from October 7th and that horrific day, we see that what's going on in Gaza, people are reacting to it. Anybody with half a heart would react to, okay? But remembering that Hamas is using human shields makes this proportionality, which Tal discussed in her briefing, an important note, okay? So, Austin was there to advise. As he said, and we'll reiterate it here as we wind this down, he wasn't there to tell Israel how to fight a war. But he was there to explain how we, the Americans, have fought wars in the same situation with regard to close fighting and the air support and all of the things that go with it, and how collateral damage can turn world opinion to you regardless of how noble the fight may be. So that was what Austin was there for. He was also there, as we said, to make a statement to the Iranians to stay out of the war by using their proxies, okay? And to leave the people alone who aren't involved in this war in the maritime area of the Red Sea. Those were the two key points. The third point was to drive home, just as President Biden has, just as Secretary Blinken has, and that is there has to be, at the end of the day, when we get to that, morning after, the plan for a two-state solution. That is the only way that you can bring in UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia into this, to bring in the people involved in the region to help the long-term goal of having peace in the Middle East, and obviously in this case where Palestinians and Israelis live together in a peaceful way. It's got to be done with a two-state solution. That is not at the moment where Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government is. Okay? It's not there. We don't know what's going to happen to Benjamin Netanyahu and his government after the war. Smart money is that he probably isn't going to be in charge. Don't know that, but the smart money is that he's not. What the U.S. is doing, and they're doing it with their partners from around the world, the French, the British, the folks who want to see Israel survive and prosper, understand that the two-state solution is the only way you get that peace. And how we get there is, at the moment, well above my pay grade. But it is what has to be figured out. And that's where Austin, Blinken, Biden, French President Macron, and others, working with people within the region, are hoping that they can figure out a morning after where there is no more October 7th terrorist attacks ever again in Israel. Well, folks, that's it for today. If we could ask a favor, as you're watching, love it if you would subscribe, hit the bell, and like us. That way, when we do this, and we do it every, at least 5 days a week, and if something breaks, we come on and we do something and let you know what's going on. So if you want to be part of our family, and we want you to, please subscribe, hit the bell, and like us. Okay, doesn't cost anything. It's very simple to do. By the way, if you disagree or agree or have questions you want me to pose to Tal or to the folks at the United States State Department or Department of Defense or the White House, by all means, put them in the comments section. I will answer them, and if it's a question that you want answered, I'll get an answer for you. Okay? So this is a team effort. I'm giving you information. You're going to give me feedback and hopefully also information. Okay? If you are someone who is listening to us on a podcast, okay, or you want to subscribe to the podcast as well, not a problem. You can find us at Apple, Amazon, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Audible, and as they say, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay. All right, well, folks. Once again, we appreciate you joining us. We will be back tomorrow, and hopefully, we'll give you some more information. We hope that information is good information and positive information. And hopefully everyone stays safe. And we will see you tomorrow when we'll talk about what's going on at the United Nations. That's our cover story for tomorrow. The United Nations and what they are and aren't doing. Okay? So until tomorrow, I'm Jim Williams. Have a wonderful day.